In this video, we're going to see how to consume a web service in C# and Visual Studio 2017. So what we need is a web service with WSDL, or Web Service Definition Language. And then we need to create a service reference within Visual Studio. And then we need some place where we can invoke the web service. Frankly, in Visual Studio, it is really easy to do this. One thing I really like about Visual Studio is the tight integration that it has and the ease of just consuming a web service. No libraries to import or anything, it's all built in. So let's start by finding a web service. WebServiceX.net is a great directory of a lot of freely available web services, and think about this when you want to design an app and you're thinking about integrating data from different sources. I'll pick a fairly simple one. I'm going to go to Value Manipulation Unit Converter, and you see here there's a length distance unit converter. So I opened this up, and there's a demo that I can run where it says change length unit. Now here's the trick, is length value, let's say 1, from length unit to length unit. It's not very obvious what they want us to put in here because it's just a text field and I could really type in anything at all and hit invoke and it probably would say I don't understand. Well, web services will come with this WSDL link. So we can open this up and take a look at it, and I've already opened it in a window here. And this is a description of the API, the Application Programming Interface for the web service, or in other words, the things that the web service can do. So it describes it in this fairly standard format, WSDL, Web Services Definition Language. If we take a look at this, we see something very interesting. First of all, it's all XML, which we saw in a previous video series, but look at the very top. Under WSDL types, there is an inline XSD schema. And if you saw the videos or you listened to my lecture on schemas, this will look somewhat familiar. We have a length value from length unit to length unit. Min occurs and max occurs. We remember what that means. Min occurs means 1 is required. Max occurs means no more than 1. But what I really want to point out is this simple type called length, because take a look at the restriction base. It needs to be a string. But then you see in here, there's an enumeration. And remember what an enumeration means. It means you have to pick something from this list. So this tells us what we're allowed to use. Notice inches with a capital I. Notice centimeters with a capital C, and both of these are plural. So now, armed with that information, we can go back and say 1 inches, and then 2 length unit, centimeters, spelled correctly. Now, those need to be in that enumeration that we saw just a moment ago. And you don't always have to jump to the WSDL to find that. There might be some documentation with the web service that tells you what it's expecting. But at worst case, you can always look in that WSDL and get an idea of what it's looking for. So now I choose invoke, and it comes back and it tells me a double value of 2.54, which sounds about right. There are about 2.54 centimeters in an inch. So with this, let's implement this in our website. I'm going to right-click and choose copy, and now I'm going to run back to Visual Studio, and I'll just make a new quick and dirty page here. We'll do add. Web form will be fine, and we'll call this Web Service Aggregator, something like that, and choose OK. Okay, so more work to come on that, but first let's go ahead and add a reference to this web service. Then after we do that, we'll go back and edit the page that we just created. So I right-click on Connected Service, and I choose Add Service Reference. Now I have Connected Service here because I created this project initially as a WCF project, or a Windows Communication Foundation project. So I paste in that WSDL link, and I choose Go. As soon as I choose Go, Visual Studio will go out, look at that WSDL, and interpret it and tell me what I can do with it. So I choose Go. We give it a second as it looks. It finds length unit, and note that it gives us a few options here. Length unit HTTP GET, length unit HTTP POST, and length unit SOAP. Let's remember the one called length unit SOAP, and also it's going to put this in a namespace, which is kind of like a category or a folder. Let's not go with the default service reference 2. If you do that, you'll end up with service reference 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll forget which is which. let's give it a meaningful name like unit converter. So unit converter and then length unit, and I choose OK. Okay, now one thing that it did behind the scenes is it went into my configuration. On a typical Windows app, that's going to be app.config, but in a web app, it's going to be web.config. It goes into my configuration and it adds this endpoint address, and we see it is called unit converter length unit SOAP. That's the name that we're using here. So we're going to need this. Actually, it's the name right here, length unit SOAP. We're going to need this in just a moment when we define the web service in our ASPX page. So just remember to go to this endpoint inside of web.config and you'll see this length unit SOAP. Okay, with that now, let's go back to the page that I made just a few moments ago, the web service aggregator page, and let's try to make some use of this web service. So web service aggregator, an ASPX page, this is something we can view in a browser. So I'm going to go to design and I'm going to go to toolbox, and what we can do is we'll grab a couple of labels rather. So we'll go to, where'd my label go? It's right there. It's hiding in plain sight. So this one we'll call unit from. Okay. And we might want to give this a drop-down box since we know the value of the enumeration, but just for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and use a plain old text box. But yeah, since we know what the enumeration values are, it's safer if we put that on a drop-down than have a user type things in. Anyway, you know what I mean, right? So, okay, text box, we're going to call this txt unit from. Okay, and then I'll go back to toolbox and I'll grab a new label. And we'll drop that there and we'll say unit 2. Okay, and then we'll grab another text box. And here we will say, we will rename this one to unit 2. Oh, oops, sorry, we'll call it txt unit 2. Okay, and then let's add one more, which is maybe like a value or a number of units. So I grab my label. Whoops, a little too far there. Grab my label from the toolbox, drop onto my page, and we will call this one length, something like that, if that helps. And yet one more text box. Okay. So click on this and rename it. I generally like to, anything I'm going to program against, anything I'm going to program against, I like to rename the ID very early on because it makes it a whole lot easier when I'm in the code behind when I'm actually dealing with this object. So unit from unit 2 length, and then we'll grab a button and we'll call the button convert. Okay, so text, we'll say convert. Well, not convet, but convert rather. Okay, and button, we'll say btn convert. Okay, and then toolbox, and then label, and we'll take the text out. We'll say 0.00 just so we remember what it is. And then for the label, we'll say LBL converted value. That'll work. Okay, at this point we have our controls on the screen. So we want to make something happen when we click that convert button. So I go ahead and I double click the convert button, which takes me in here to an event handler. This event handler will execute when I click on the button. Okay, now we need a reference to our web service. We need to start with that namespace. Remember I said don't call it service 1, call it something you'll remember. So sure enough, we have unit converter. Okay. And then a period, and then we'll say length unit SOAP client. Okay, we'll call it client equals new unit converter length unit SOAP client. But if you take a look at this, it requires a string in one of these calls. Now, what's that string? You see, the string is the endpoint configuration name. There might be multiple ways that we can talk to a web service. Maybe SOAP, maybe HTTP GET or POST. We have to tell it our preferred mechanism here. Now, how do we do that? Well, remember what I said about Web.config. Remember when I said we have that endpoint address thing? That's what we want to use here. So either one of these will work. I'll go ahead and grab this one. I'm tempted to grab the lower one, but we'll use the top one for now. So back again to the code behind, and we paste this as a string. There we go, length unit soap. Okay, and now we say client dot, and what do we have? We have, if I scroll down a bit, change length unit is our best option. So we send in a length value as the first argument. Then we have to use some constants here to represent what length we're going from and to. So let's go ahead and do change length unit. Okay, now the first item is simply going to be what the user entered in that txt length, that txt length item. Okay, txt length.text. Okay, so we'll say what we'll do is we'll parse this into a double, because we know that the first argument needs to be a double type, not a string type. So we'll say double dbl length equals double, and then we'll say dot parse. Take a look at the signature for parse. Parse converts a string type to a double type. So double dot parse, and then we pass in the text that is in that length text box. So there's our dbl length. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to take a shortcut on the other arguments. I'm not going to worry about pulling them from the form in this video. We can clean that up in a later video, no worries. So I'm going to say unit converter. Take a look at the IntelliSense that comes up here. It says unit converter.lengths. So that's a real gimme here. Unit converter.lengths. Notice how it comes up here. Now I press the dot on lengths and look at the list that comes up here. So several things that we might recognize, and we might well recognize them because remember, it's part of this enumeration we saw in the WSDL. So these two things are very much compatible. A list of essentially constants it's giving us here on lengths, and also that enumeration that we see in the XSD and the WSDL. So lengths, and then I'll say dot inches. One moment, inches, like so. And then we'll say we need the 2 units, so I'll say unit converter. And then once again, we'll say unit converter dot lengths, pick like so. And then we'll say dot centimeters, like so. Whoops. So you see where we eventually want to go here. We want to make a drop down that contains each of these items that the user can just pick from a drop down. So we'll eventually get there. So, okay, looking pretty good so far. So what does it not like here then? Okay, it thinks okay, I see, I have an extra paren. No problem, that's an easy fix. Now, change length unit. Note that that returns a variable of type double. So I'll say double dbl converted length equals boom, like so. And now let's update the UI with the converted length. So we're going to say lbl converted value dot text equals dbl converted length, where usually enter means yes, I like the autocomplete. Now it doesn't like putting a double data type into a text type, so we can do a little bit of a hack there to get that converted. Just force it in like so by forcing it into a string. And I still have a red line because I have a little misspelling up here, so it looks like that will take care of it. Okay, with that, let's give it a try. So Web Service Aggregator, I'm going to select and I'm going to play this in Google Chrome. Let's see what we get. Now remember, for this video, we're not using the unit from or to. We've hard-coded that. I'll just put in length of 1 and hit convert, and let's watch what happens. Sure enough, there's 2.54. You see that happen relatively quickly. So there are 2.54 centimeters and 1 inch. What about 12 inches or 1 foot? We hit convert, 30.48. So you see, we're able to get this data relatively quickly, near real time, on this web service, which is essentially freely available. Now, of course, go to their terms of service to see the whole description. But you see, it's very straightforward to implement a web service in Visual Studio with C#. So think about the other web services that are available. Think about the sources of data and how you can integrate together those sources of data to really make information. I hope this video was helpful. There will be several more that follow, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.